Welcome back yet again. Here we go with another episode of Back to the Past. I am Blair. And in this episode, I'm going to try to structurally finish up this carport. That's going to involve closing in these ends, putting in a long tie on the ceiling joists, and then also some diagonal bracing to take care of the lower part of the carport. And then, most important would be the knee braces in the north-south direction. The east-west ones were real easy to put in, but because of the way that I constructed this thing, there's a lot to be done on the north-south one. So keep watching and we'll get started on that in a few minutes. I had said previously that I really constructed this thing for a lot heavier snow load than what there will ever be here in Arkansas. Probably this would easily handle a 50 or 60 or maybe even 80 or 90 pound snow load, but Arkansas's design load is only 10 pounds. So what that means is I could put quite a load on this and not collapse it. Well, looking up, there's a lot of room up there for storage for things like drying lumber and storing lumber, and I really do need that space. But if I close in these ends, I would only have access to fairly short boards that I could put up there. So in order to be able to handle something like a 16 or 20 footer, let me show you what I've done. Now, although the access isn't great, I can get 20 footers through this hole. I put one over there too, just to keep everything looking sort of symmetrical. This gives me access to a lot of long storage space. Well, that takes care of this side, and I don't have enough lumber to finish the other side, so it'll be back to the sawmill before I get to doing that over there. Next, I can go ahead and start on those 2x4s and bracing these lower part of the ceiling. The one thing that I was concerned about is that it would really take away the definition of these trusses, having that back there, and to some degree it does, without a doubt. But what I'll gain in functionality will be, I think, just immense from having that there. If you were part of my family or knew me very well, you would know how much I absolutely despise snow. So the less I have to clean off my truck when it snows in the winter, the happier I'll be. All right, looking up at the structure, we have the crisscrossing ceiling joists. They are bolted together with that donut that I showed on an earlier show. Between them, this here is a temporary brace that was just really to help me with the spacing and to help me keep a straight line on where those two intersected. So that's going to come down, but before it does, there needs to be a permanent one installed there. I don't want it to be on the underside, I want it to be on the overside. So I went ahead and I've laid in a 20-foot 2x4 up there. So my next project is to be getting up on top of that and go ahead and get that one screwed down and then remove this one. Okay, we are tied off to the west side of the rafter on this end, and I checked my layout on the beam, and that rafter was just set perfectly. Over on the north side, again, we are tied off to the west side of the rafter, and again, that rafter was set just about perfectly. Now, I decided if this was going to be within 1/8 of an inch that I wouldn't mess with it, but it's actually about 1/4 of an inch. You can see there we can see it off by about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and move the whole works to the west about 1/4 of an inch. But before I do that, I'm going to get my temporary braces up there in place on one end so they're all ready to go. Okay, so now we have a diagonal brace that is screwed into the top of that joist at the rafter, and we know it's not moving and not going anywhere, so that's a good anchor point. The other end of it is not tied to anything yet, and then I have the same thing going in the opposite direction. You can kind of see that diagonal brace going that way. I am tied off to the tractor with a strap and ready to try to pull that to perfection. Okay, that took a little harder pull than what I thought it might, but we have achieved perfection. And my problem is I didn't have the outrigger set on the tractor, so it was actually moving my tractor. I'll go ahead and put in probably 4 screws now to hold this in place. Okay, if we look at this would be the southwest corner. We need to have a knee brace that goes in from that 6x6 post, and we'll make the bottom of that knee brace about the same elevation as what the east-west knee braces are. But looking up, there's nothing to attach it to directly. So it just so happens that I have a couple of treated 4x6s left over from a job a long time ago that are going to be ideal. Now I could block just between this ceiling joist and the truss, but I really didn't put a lot of strength in using just one ceiling joist. So what I did is I cut the 4x6 long enough to go from the outside of this one clear up against the truss. I've notched down 3.5 inches here and here. I will end up using a hidden joist hanger right there to take care of the load on this side, and I'll use some angle brackets, one on each side here, and that there or there, probably there to be more out of the way, and then my diagonal brace will end up coming from here down to the post. I think that'll work. And then, thinking like an engineer and wanting to transfer loads properly, I've talked already about diagonal braces on the ceiling joists, permanent ones, and what I will do will be to run a diagonal brace from here into this 4x6 roughly to the center of the building, and doing that on all 4 corners, we have the load essentially being put on the center of the structure, which is exactly where we want it, because we've got opposing forces then to help to resist whatever force the wind might try to do to be able to move this thing in this direction. Now, I'm really not worried about a hinge point here because I have lag bolts going through from the rafter. I've got rafter plate or angle plates holding those in place. So having, I think there's 18 of them across here, I'm really not worried about a hinge point here. Where I am a little concerned about a hinge point would be right there. Now, I do have these T-plates on each side. I do also have a lag bolt. I think it's a 12-inch lag bolt that I drilled. Actually, it's countersunk into this beam down to about here. So there is a lag bolt on the inside of that goes through the beam into the post. That's, of course, going to help with it. Now, that having 6 posts, that's going to resist a lot of hinging here, but that is still where the hinge point is that I would be at all concerned about. The one you just looked at is not yet nailed in place so that I can get the proper hangers in there, but I'll show you how I made them. First thing that I did was to set a stop to where I can only cut this deep in these sections that I'm putting in these braces. So I'll cut out 1.5 inches here to that depth of 3.5 inches. And then the same thing on this end. I'll go 1.5 inches wide by 3.5 inches deep. That has that anchored in there pretty nice and solid. I think before I move back and attach the other side, I'll go ahead and put in this diagonal brace. Okay, so you can see how that 4x6 is placed in there and how it is diagonally braced toward the center of the building, and it'll make a whole lot more sense once we get that, that knee brace put in. I am really happy not only in the way this looks, but structurally how it all came together, especially in a spot where I really didn't even think of how I was going to end up doing this, having the main truss overhang the posts by as much as they did. But it actually came together pretty well. So it's bolted with a lag bolt into the post. Then we come up and into the thing that I put in yesterday, the treated 4x6. That's pretty well supported. It's got a lag bolt and a couple of structural screws in it. Then structural screws in the diagonal brace that transfer the load all the way to the center of the building. And then you can see it coming down the other side to that same 4x6 there, and then on down to the post. So thinking as an engineer, you're always thinking about transferring loads. This one I think got transferred really nicely, not only across the building, but to the center of the building. And it's really important with these knee braces, they're not real good at a tension load. They're excellent at a compression load. So it's really important to have them in pairs. Now, I've got 4 of them in the east-west direction on each side, so a total of 8 going in the east-west direction. There will only be 4 going the north-south direction. I'm not going to put anything in the middle. I don't get an awful lot of wind here, and this is really probably way over-designed from what it needs to be, but I'd rather have a little bit of comfort, and the first good wind will tell. Now, as you can see, I'm pretty much surrounded almost entirely by trees all the way around. I still have the far end of the carport to do, but there's not much sense in recording that because it'll be the same as what I did on this end. So we'll go ahead and end it here, but I really have an awful lot to get done before winter sets in. I've got a couple storage projects. Well, you'll find out about that in the future. I will leave you here now and say goodbye. Thank you for being here. I will see you next time around.